Alright, let's talk about loops, and let's talk about it in conjunction with arrays. So oftentimes they work together. Loops will run a certain block of code over and over again until there's some condition that's met. Okay, so let's work with this block of code, and what we're going to do is just move this down, and we'll work with this a little bit here. Okay, so if you notice what's common with each of these statements, right, or actually this statement, right, is we have the variable, but we have an index, right? We have a number that's going to change. So, for example, if we want to print all of these, right? Hopefully you see that there's an easier way. There must be an easier way to do that. So, to do that, to print all these elements within one line, what if there's a variable integer I, and that I was 0, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3. And so instead of printing all 4 lines, we could just print I, and then run this block of code over and over again until we print all the elements. So that's what a loop is for, right? So we're going to put this inside a do loop, okay? And then every time we're going to execute this line of code, we're going to increment I equals I plus 1. So let's start I equal to 0, right? So in other words, we want to print out the first element, so we want to print out states at 0. And then once that executes, it'll add 1 to I, and then we'll put I will be 1, then we'll print Ohio, and then New Jersey, and so forth. So we want to execute this until, we'll say while I is less than 5. So once I is less than or equal to 5, less than 5. Once I is 4, basically this loop will stop. So now let me just do a sysout something like this to kind of give a little bit of a pause in what we see in the console. Now when I run this, now this is printing every line, right? So we can just to make it more clear, state, and we'll concatenate. It's printing every line one by one based on the loop. And so we can see this is really, really helpful that we can use our code in. Okay, so this is one. So the do loop, so we'll say the do loop executes enters the loop, then tests condition. Okay. So the other way we can do this is the while loop, which tests condition first, then enters loop. Okay, so we can say something like while whatever our condition is here, and then we can print the same thing. So let's do the same example where we have we're going to print. So we'll do another variable, we'll do integer c for counter, or n, and it's kind of another common one. We will do the same little algorithm, right? So we'll print out state at, and just again to make it clear, n, then we'll do states at, there we go, at n. So we need to initialize n equal to 0. Okay, and then we want to say n. Now a shortcut of I equals I plus 1, we can just say I or n plus plus, because that it knows then to take whatever the value is and add 1 to it, but previously. Okay, so let's say as long as n is less than 5 once again, or we can say less than or equal to 4. That's the same thing. You'll see both written. They both mean the same thing. And there we get the exact same result. Okay, so what if we want to do one other thing, right? So what if we said what if we had a Boolean state found? We'll say it's equal to we'll initialize it to false. Okay, so let's say let's say string state equals, right? So let's say that, so we don't want to print, we want to evaluate this. All right, so we want to grab the value. Whoops. We're going to grab the value and put it into a variable state. And we want to say if, let's say the state is equal to, let's say once it equals Texas, then we want to say, sysout state found. Okay? And then what we can do is we can say, now, let's now test, let's make state found equal true. So in other words, once our while loop, we want to run this while loop as long as state found equals, well, false. But if it's false, right, so this is going to be a Boolean. It's going to evaluate either true or false. If it's true, it's going to execute. And so right now, because we initialized it to false, we actually want the opposite of that. So we want exclamation point. So state found is true, and so now we want this to be, now we want to increment to true once we find Texas. So what we expect to see now is, let's see, the same, let's print the state, there we go. And once we get Texas, then we should see that we get out of the loop. And there we go, we get Ohio, New Jersey, Texas. Once we get Texas, state found is changed to true. Then we test the value of true, we get the opposite, and then it's false, so therefore this while loop stops executing. If this was true, for example, right away we started true, we see that we never even entered the loop in the first place. Okay, so that's a big difference between do and while. While will test the condition first, then enters the loop. Okay, so what we've seen, by the way, is how loops are helpful with going through arrays, so that can be really helpful. There's another loop that's even better for iterating through an array, and that's the for loop. So we'll say for loop, best structure for iterating through an array. So if you notice what is happening every time here is that we are using an index and we're testing that value, right? So, and we're changing, we're printing something based on that index. So for loop can do just that. We say for, we'll say integer x equals, so here our first segment of this condition, or this block here, is we initialize a variable, right? So right what we did here, we did a variable that's going to be our index, so we do that in this line. And then we do a semicolon space, the condition. So we did, just like we did our condition here, basically do the same condition, and then we tell it how much we're going to increment x by. So we do x plus plus. Right? So here we are initializing, giving our condition, and our incrementation all in one sleek line. And then from there we can just say we want to print, let's see, states at x. Right? So we'll say here sysout, say printing with for loop /n to give it another line break. Okay? Here we go. Printing with for loop /n the other way. And there we see the entire array printed through based on what we print out in this for loop. So for loops are really common. You'll see those much more often than you will a do or a while loop, especially when you're working with data structures like arrays. So that's a little bit of an introduction to loops. We'll for sure be using these throughout our project and our training, so make sure you're comfortable with iterating through and setting up a do, a while, and a for, and the difference between those three and when to use one over the other.